Welcome back to the Big Life Podcast, ladies and gentlemen, where we help you to live and lead with purpose.
Today's episode hits close to home for every leader who's ever felt stuck, like the business can't move forward without them.
So, we're talking about one of the hardest lessons that I've had to learn. Here it is. The moment that you become essential, your growth stops.
Robin, here we go. I tell you, we'll unpack what it means to stop being the bottleneck, how to move from being the hero to architect, and how to build systems and leaders that grow with you. Robin, this is going to be a fun, challenging episode for Neal today, I can tell you already.
Welcome to the Big Life Podcast, where dreams aren't just imagined, they're built brick by brick, belief by belief. Hosted by Neal Oates Jr. and Robin Lewis, this show is your invitation to discover your amazing capabilities, invest in your growth, and unleash your potential in ways you've only dreamed of. Join Neal and Robin as they dive deep into stories, insights, and tools designed to inspire you to show up big, live intentionally, and give yourself away for the betterment of those around you. Get ready to rise to what you're truly worthy of. The Big Life starts now.
So, whether you're leading a team or a business or your dream, this one's going to stretch your thinking and strengthen your leadership. My name is Robin Lewis, and Neal Oates Jr. is my co-host here with me, and we're glad to be here with you. Neal?
Robin, the leadership bottleneck. Here we go, sir. So I remember you saying that line, the moment you become essential, your growth stops. That was a gut punch for leaders, myself included. And I want to ask you, you don't just grab something from the air. Where did that realization come from for you?
Honestly, Neal, is from experience, and that's the reality. So it was more than a gut punch for me. For a long time, I thought, being everywhere meant being effective. Every decision, every approval, every next step came through me. And I was proud of that until I realized that the business couldn't grow beyond my capacity.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, if you're like Robin and Neal, and we think of ourselves highly like that. And I know that word capacity and limits. And once we start being stuck, it hits all of us. And that's the hard to, and when we're looking, so you talk about experience, it's hard to see in the moment because it feels like leadership. And I know that's the goal, right? You're answering the questions. Robin is fixing the problems. Neal is keeping the pace. And everyone is right there behind us. And we feel good. It's a great feeling, right?
Exactly. But the truth is, if everything depends on you, you're not leading a business. You're just kind of holding one together, right? The truth is, if the business falls apart when you step away, then you haven't built a business. Somebody told me the other day, you've built a busyness.
I want to agree with you begrudgingly. I want to say, well, that's so good. But if I say that, it means that I now have to do further study, right? So the real question is, how do I stop being the bottleneck without losing what makes my business strong, Robin? So that's where we want to go because many of us think it is about us and our personal discipline. And we talked about this in the previous episode, last week's episode, but it's not just about what we've built and holding and setting the brand or the standard. So how do I stop being the bottleneck without losing what makes this thing that we've built so strong?
Exactly. So what we're sharing with you today is that you don't just delegate tasks, you design leadership. So you build systems and you create clarity and you build culture that can run without you at the center.
Already, Robin, ladies and gentlemen, I need you all to buckle up, get your pens, your pads ready. Because anytime you start talking about designing something, Robin, that is going to require more of us. And I love that phrase, design leadership. You've said before that delegation transfers task, but design transfers thinking. And that is a key to what we're talking about as we're designing this leadership and building something that rolls and runs without us?
Yeah, because we hear delegation, and most leaders think I need to delegate. And yes, we do need to delegate, but most people think that that's the answer. It's a step, right? But it's not the full picture. In other words, delegation says, do this for me. Whereas design says, here's how we think, here's how we decide, and here's how we solve problems. There's a difference. And so you're transferring the thinking process now. You're setting guidelines for how we make decisions here and guidelines for how we solve problems. And that's empowering.
And not only is that empowering, Robin, we talked about earlier, that's what separates the hero from the architect, right? So just keep moving down the path that you're going, because I'm enjoying it, I think, but you are smacking me left and right. So let's talk about separating that hero from the architect, because you are now designing leadership.
Exactly, man. So the hero fixes the problem, right? And I've been a hero more than I would want to admit. If I can be honest with our listeners, the hero fixes the problem, but the architect fixes the structure that keeps creating the problem. When I could start focusing now on the structure that creates the problem, now that's making progress.
So, Robin, I've got a suggestion. Episode over. Let's stop it right there, ladies and gentlemen. So, because think about it. You're talking about the architect is going to fix the structure that creates the problem. Instead of having to fix the problem, solve the problem, you're like, well, let's look at this from a different angle. What if we just eliminate the perpetual cycle of the problem showing up? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. Robin Lewis, if you want to continue, you go right ahead, sir. Come on, keep rolling, brother.
That's good. That's good, sir. That's good. But that's the shift that changes everything. Heroes build activity and architects build legacy.
Stop, Robin. Hold on, man. No. So, okay. Now and I tell you to stop, and you just keep going, giving us more and more and more. But would you just repeat that if and I'm putting you on the spot, if you remember what you just said, would you repeat that? Because I think this is the key for us, because I know we talked about how good this episode was going to be last week. I was not expecting this so quickly. And so now I've got to allow my brain to catch up with my emotions, because one, we've already talked about us being the bottleneck, and we're not delegating, we're designing and going from the hero to the architect. And I'm like, it's gym after gym after gym. So would you talk about that activity piece and the legacy piece? Would you repeat that for me?
Yeah, Neil, because what we want our listeners to catch is that if you want something that lasts, you have to lead like an architect. Because as a hero, we're building activity and we're continually having to do that activity. But architects build legacy, right? And so as an architect, when you're leading like an architect, you're building something that lasts, that's sustainable. That's the point.
So most of us, we have thought we were building legacy when we were not, right? So we're having to chew on this a little bit. So now, of course, as in every episode, this is where we really break this down. And this is where the practicality of the big life comes. And so that's what I love about being here, even on the receiving end of some great counsel. You said there are 3 big shifts that help leaders move from bottleneck to builder, to that architect. So I would like for us, if you're willing to, I think now would be a great time for us to start looking at those big shifts and how we as leaders can start doing the right thing, so that we're no longer the bottleneck, but we are the builder.
Yeah. So let's touch on them right now. So there's 3 shifts that we need to make as architects. The first one is to shift from doing to designing. We kind of talked a little bit about that already. We're talking about the fact that you don't scale by doing more. You scale by designing better, right? Andy Stanley said that leaders who refuse to replace themselves will eventually be replaced.
Know why you're laughing, Robert? Because you and I have both been on the verge, maybe more times than we want to admit, to being replaced, right?
Yep.
Okay, so that's a tough truth for a lot of us, Robin. And so when Andy Stanley says it, it's honest and we need to hear it. We don't like it. but we need it. And so, if I'm not mistaken, you said the leader who refuses to replace themselves will eventually be replaced. I've
Yeah.
got it. Let's keep
Yeah.
going.
Yeah. And it is tough, a tough truth, but it's freeing once you embrace it. Start. So here's some ideas. Start documenting what works. And what I want to encourage our listeners is this, is if you can't describe how something happens, then how are you going to improve it? Right. And then if only you can do it, then it's not a system. It's a dependency, right, Neil?
Dependency is a 4-letter word, right? So anytime we hear dependency, we're like, that's not a good thing, but we do it every day in our businesses and in our lives, and we wear it as that badge of honor. And here's why I love it. I love that because documentation isn't busy work. It's leadership work. We could say, well, I don't want to document. It's going to take too much time. And then we get back into that old mindset of, well, I'm the one that has to do the work, so I can't document the process. But that's where real leadership work takes place, in that documentation.
Exactly. And when you design how things flow, your leadership stops being the lid and it starts being a launch pad. When you design how things flow, then now you're welcoming leaders to step in and bring their brilliance and their creativity and their art and their abilities and their strengths. Right. And so the second shift is to go from leading by proximity to leading by clarity. That's number two.
So do me a favor. Would you go ahead and just explain that? Because I know that you've done the research. You have some authors, some leaders who have done this right. So I'm excited to see what you're talking about when you talk about proximity versus clarity.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a quote that says you can't scale what you haven't structured. So we're talking about structure here. Early.
Robin, hold on. So this is that hard work that happens before we bring the team in, before we get to the meeting, before the lights are on. Everything you're talking about is that behind the scenes work of doing structure, documentation, and no one will know it while you're working on it. They won't know it until you've opened it up and said, now we have this real thing. So you talk about we can't scale what we haven't structured. Keep going, man.
Man, Neil, early in my agency days, there were only four of us. I remember we were in a room, four of us in one room, and I could hear them, they could hear me. So communication just happened, and we could correct things instantly, right? We could make changes one way or the other. We could celebrate or we could change, and so that made communication very easy, right?
And it does happen easily because it's small, right? That's the beauty of small beginnings. And I think we forget that. So you're like, oh, we don't need to have a communication meeting. This is a communications meeting.
Exactly. All day long. And so, but when we grew beyond that room, what used to work by proximity started breaking down. And suddenly I had to lead through clarity and not just closeness, right? I think about, if our listeners didn't listen to last week's episode, I would encourage them to go back and listen where you showed that 5-step framework for helping to create collaboration. That's what I needed to start doing.
And that's a good point, because so many small business owners stay stuck thinking, if I can't, or if I can just be in the room, I can keep it together. And we never move beyond that mindset.
Exactly. So if your team needs you in the room to move forward, then your leadership is limited. But clarity replaces proximity. That was your step one that you shared last week, right? Is bring in clarity.
Mhm.
And that means we're talking about, things like clear priorities. We're talking about having clear values. We're talking about clear decision lanes and clear accountability. When you can bring clarity around those things, when everyone knows the mission and how to move forward towards it, then you don't have to hover over. You just have to lead. Right, Neil?
Absolutely. So we've got two of the three big shifts that we as leaders, and I'm not going to say could make. And Robin and I don't like to tell us what we should do, but these are three shifts that we think are absolutely necessary, right? So you've given us 1 and 2, Robin. Would you go ahead and move to that third shift as we go ahead and make sure that we're leading the right way?
So the third shift is going from fast growth to sustainable growth.
Robin, no, don't tell me that I've got to slow down and build this thing because we're already designing, right? We're not just delegating, and we want that fast thing, right? You talk about sustainability. That is a totally different word that has a different meaning because you've already mentioned legacy. I can't wait to see what you're going to say. Come on.
Well, hey, here's the reality. Fast growth feels exciting. We like fast growth until it starts outrunning your structure. Sometimes the problem isn't momentum. Sometimes the problem is maintenance.
Say it again, Robin, for the people in the back, sir.
Neil, I have been there, brother. The problem isn't always momentum. It's maintenance. Healthy growth moves at the pace of clarity, of culture, and of the capacity that you have, right? Sometimes we need to slow down until we have more people. For example, we need to slow down on purpose so that we're not because we want to lose ground, but we want to make sure that what we're building can stand.
Robin, ladies and gentlemen, so if you've been here with us on the podcast for any amount of time, Robin always mentions the time when his business was growing faster than he was as a leader. And that's so powerful because in the long run, sustainable growth outpaces fast growth every single time. If we look at those great companies, those great leaders, those organizations, they're saying, we're designing a legacy. It's not about the today, the next quarter, or even the next year. It's how can we build something that is not going to be a fad, it's going to be sustainable. And anytime I hear of fast growth versus sustainable growth, I think of your example, your cautionary tale, Robin, where you have admittedly said, we built this thing and I wasn't ready for it. And then one area that or one, let me say, mistake caused you to lead in a way that you weren't proud of looking back because you were in maintenance or you were in the mode of trying to keep everything together, but you were the bottleneck as well. And
Yeah.
so that's why when I hear us talk about topics like this, ladies and gentlemen, this is coming from a space of experience, not of just study from a workbook.
It's so true. And don't we see it? Don't we see it, folks? Don't you see it in people that serve you? Maybe it's businesses that you are a customer of. You can kind of feel when this happens for a company. I have vendors that I can just feel it. The service time slows down and so on. You can't reach them now. You used to be able to reach them right away, and now all of a sudden you can't reach them. You can build fast or you can build to last, right? The best leaders choose both, but they do it in order. Right, Neil?
No, so absolutely. And I think that doing it in order is the key. And so you did mention something, talk about slow down on purpose, right? So
Yeah.
we don't lose ground, right? Slow down on purpose so we can make sure that we're building this foundation, this structure, so that when the success comes, when the clientele comes, when the customers and those orders come in, we can actually handle it.
Yeah.
And so here's what I love. You've lived this. You've shared before about that insurance agency, about your insurance agency, and how that lesson hit home for you.
Yeah.
And so it shows me that this is a man, a friend, a leader who did the right thing in starting the business, did the growth part, maybe not to the best of his ability, but then came back and reflected on that. And now you share so others don't have to have those headaches and heartbreaks that you did.
Yeah, it's so true, man. The truth is that I was stretched thin during that time that you're talking about. My team was stretched thin, and our systems couldn't keep up with the demand. That's the reality. Everything looked strong from the outside, but inside we were burning out, Neil. That's the reality. We were having a hard time keeping up.
And so here's what I want to say to everyone who just heard what Robin said, that's a common trap for most entrepreneurs. Success on the surface, and then we have that strain underneath. And we're not even talking about just the duck on the water and then them kicking their feet. We're talking about that burnout, that dangerous strain where all of a sudden it seems easier to throw your hands up and do nothing or to quit than it is to start designing. And so I think that's a key for us to hold on to today.
And Neil, here's a reality that we don't share very often. I don't share very often, but what it actually did for us is is that it actually caused our business to go in the opposite direction. Because you know what happens when you're not handling things in a timely manner. I remember I was getting call after call or email after email saying things like, "Hey, Robin, we put in for a request for a quote, and it's been 3 days now. We haven't heard anything. What's going on over there?" Right. And so I had to pull back out of necessity, Neil. There's only so much of that you can do because people are not going to wait for you. They can go down the street and find another insurance agent, right?
Yeah.
And so I had to pull back, not to slow down growth, but to build a better foundation for it. I started focusing more on infrastructure, right? I started focusing more on developing leaders and shaping culture. That's when things began to change, and we didn't just get bigger. Because of it, we actually got better.
That is a challenge because we want bigger. We say we want better, but better requires something more of us. And so that's legacy leadership right there. Growth through people, not just around people. And so you were using your leadership capability to pour into those people, to grow them, to collaborate with them on the way to building something better. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to make sure that you heard that. Before we go any further, Robin, we often talk about our experiences. I know that we reflect and we go back and look at things and assess them, and we encourage people to fail forward. So as you pull back and you start talking about the infrastructure and then the development of leaders and then culture, what impact not did that have on the organization? What did that have on Robin Lewis, the man, the leader? Because that realization and awareness of, well, this isn't working. How did that shape the younger business leader, Robin Lewis, into the man that's sitting in front of us today?
Wow, it's a good question. First of all, it was scary. It was scary. Like
Mm.
I was definitely over my head. I was overwhelmed, if you will, truly stretched thin. But it helped me to realize that that's leadership. I started diving into, that's when I really became a student of leadership. Like you and I are sharing some of what we've learned with our listeners through this podcast. I became a student of that, and I still am. I am still learning. So it's helped me to understand that that has to continue, right? And the better that I can get at doing that is the better the organization will be. And now it's also helped me to understand, Neil, that the more that I can develop other leaders within the organization, that's really building structure for the organization to go on. And the more clarity around the culture, the values, and therefore the culture that we have, is the better that I can actually use that to do reviews, to create incentives,
Mhm.
to reward, to determine somebody's performance. It's how well are they doing at living the values out. And so it's helped me to improve as a leader and focus on even more meaningful things that can help the organization to continue to not just thrive and last, but to continue to grow and be sustainable as we do. So it's a continued journey, and so it causes me to have to step out and do things that are continue to be new to me and a little bit more uncomfortable, and empowering others
Mhm.
and so on. So it's actually helped me to become a student of leadership.
So I am honored that you would share that with us. Thank you, Robin. I know I put you on the spot there. But before we close this episode out, I would love for us to just do some reflections, maybe for our audience, because I know we hit them fast and in a hurry and with a lot of great gems. So I'm going to encourage you all to go back and re-listen to this episode of the Big Life Podcast and have your notepads, your iPad, or however you're going to take notes ready, because Robin was dropping gem after gem. And I told you 6 minutes in, I was ready to end the episode because we had enough for the week. But Robin, go ahead and share maybe some truths, some reflections with the audience that you have even taken away from your experience, but even as we were preparing for today's episode.
Yeah, so one that I would say to our listeners, and this can be encouraging and challenging at the same time. And here it is. You don't stop being the bottleneck by working harder. You stop being the bottleneck by leading wiser. And so you need to develop your leadership capabilities. You need to become a better leader, right?
Absolutely. And so, Robin, would you go ahead and run us through some of those things that you have encouraged us to do? I believe that you had one that mentioned hero and architect and some others. So would you just go ahead and run us down that list, if you would, Rob?
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely talked about being the hero and becoming the architect instead. So instead of fixing problems, you wanna fix the structure that's creating the problems. But there are three shifts that we mentioned, Neil, that I'll repeat them for our listeners. One is you shift from doing to designing. You shift from doing to designing. So you become the designer of leadership. The second shift is you shift from leading by proximity to leading by clarity. And that, that's where you have to take time away from the day to day to bring that clarity, have clear priorities set for the organization. Um, um, you know, a- and so you're setting clarity so that, as like in my example, as the room got bigger and people got
And you can't just scream across the room, right?
right? And so clarity of priorities, clarity of values, clarity of accountability. You have clear accountability and you have clear decision lanes. So you're creating clarity as you move from leading by proximity to leading by clarity. And the third shift was shifting from fast growth to sustainable growth, and that's the one where we just talked about, where you have to kind of slow down and put the infrastructure in place and making sure that you have the capacity for the growth. We talked about the fact that healthy growth moves at the pace of clarity, of culture, and capacity,
And
right?
Rob, that is some good stuff, man. So I'm gonna break it down. So me being from Alabama, we're gonna speak Alabamese and make it super simple. So when I hear that, the notes that I have here is that you're telling me that the shift, I have to move from hero to architect. I've got to go from control to capacity. And this one might be after the moving from hero to architect. That's going to be my biggest challenge. And then we have from control to capacity. I think my second biggest challenge, if I'm being totally transparent with you, Robin, is moving from short term hustle to long term health that you just mentioned. And
That's
so
a big one.
that's where I find myself today. Because I know you mentioned that leadership that designs for others is leadership that lasts. And I love that. And so it's really put a challenge, forced me to look at myself in the mirror. And so I am going to play the role of a challenger this week, Rob. And so that's the challenge for myself this week. And I'm going to ask you to join me in this. Take one area of your life or business and ask, am I leading like a hero or an architect? And that's going to be a lot for Neal Oates to chew on this week, Robin.
Right on, Neil. Well said. And so to our listeners, if this conversation helped you, and we hope it has, then share it with another leader who might need to hear it also. That really goes a long way for us. We do this to add value to you. And if it's added value to you, we're asking you to pass it on. And so it can add value to others.
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been an honor and a privilege to be here with you on this episode of the Big Life Podcast. Robin, as always, I am honored and I enjoy hanging out here with you as we sharpen each other and sharpen our audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to leave you like we always do, and that is that we love you, God loves you, and there's nothing you can do about it. And until the next time we see you or you see us, we're right there with you. Peace.
Peace.